The Buffalo Bills pre-camp roster is highly competitive, but how many spots are truly up for grabs? We're exploring that today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. I'm excited for today's conversation because we're going to explore this roster and truly ask ourselves the question, how many spots are truly available? And this idea comes courtesy of a herd mentality question that I got from David. David said, in your opinion, who are your roster locks and how many roster spots does that leave? Well, we're going to do that today. We're going to go through each position and I'm going to identify who I think the roster locks are. I'm going to identify the players that I would be surprised if they were cut. And then we can truly look at, all right, how many spots are available for this football team during training camp? So we'll go through each position, identify those players, and come out of this with a good understanding of exactly which spots are up for grabs. Now, the ultimate variable is injuries. You know, one injury happens and it changes the landscape of an entire position. So this, of course, assumes that everyone is healthy. So let's explore. Let's start with quarterback. That Josh Allen guy, 17, you may have seen him before. He won the NFL MVP. That guy's a roster lock. But I think that's it at quarterback. I think you've got a legit battle between Mitchell Trubisky and Mike White for QB2. And so for, I think, every other position, I'm going to have roster locks. I'm going to have guys that I would be surprised if they cut. For quarterback, it's Josh Allen is a roster lock, and then Trubisky and White battle it out for the QB2 spot. And I've said this before, but I think this is the most competitive QB2 battle that the Bills have had in a long time, certainly under Sean McDermott. And so we'll see what these guys have. I don't think much of either one of them. I think based on the makeup of the Bills roster and the choices that they make at QB2 and what they prefer there, it's a good group. I think in a vacuum, it's not. But may the best man win. I think Trubisky's got the upper hand because he's got more time with the Bills in this offense. He's got a tighter relationship with Josh Allen, but he's also $1 million more than Mike White. And so I'm curious to see how this plays out. It's kind of an underrated storyline for this team throughout preseason and camp, where we're legitimately going to need to watch these backup quarterbacks and try to figure out which one's the best one. Now, of course, Shane Buechele is part of this mix, but I don't envision him really challenging either Trubisky or White. Now, the good news for Shane Buechele is he's probably got a spot on the practice squad, but I don't think he's a legit contender for QB2. So Trubisky versus White for QB2 behind Josh Allen. Let's get to running back. And at running back, I feel like this is a pretty straightforward group. James Cook, a roster lock. And then this group of Ray Davis and Ty Johnson as RB2, RB3, they fall into the category of, it would surprise me if either didn't make this team. I'm going to put Reggie Gilliam in the same bucket of, I'd be surprised if he didn't make this team. He's really unchallenged at fullback. He's a proven special teamer. The Bills like to get Reggie going, you know, later in the season when they want to go big personnel, late when the weather's cool. So I think he's going to be on this team. I mean, maybe they could reduce the role of Reggie Gilliam and bake it into Jackson Hawes. But I felt like we had that conversation for so many years about, well, do they need Reggie Gilliam and Quentin Morris? Can one guy just do both? Obviously, the Bills don't feel like that's a role that can be handled by two different people. So Davis, Johnson, Gilliam in the I would be surprised bucket, James Cook in the roster lock bucket. And so you have Darrington Evans and Frank Gore Jr. as the bubble players, but I think they would need either an injury or they would need to perform at such a level that it bumps one of those guys off, and I just don't see it happening. Darrington Evans has had so many different chances to stick with so many different teams. This will be his fourth time on the Bills. He had 3 stints with the Bears. Frank Gore Jr., I know he has fans out there, but we're talking about an undrafted free agent rookie running back that's now entering his second season, but he's small and slow. I mean, historically small and slow for the position. And folks, that just doesn't work in the NFL. So I know he's a hard-nosed runner. He's likable in preseason, but how many times are we going to fall for the Raheem Blackshears of the world and Antonio Williams of the world before you realize that there's a certain caliber of skill set that's necessary to crack an NFL roster? And Frank Gore Jr. just doesn't have it. Small and slow. Doesn't have it. Fine practice squad running back. Fine player to get you through a preseason. You don't want this guy taking meaningful snaps for your offense. Too limited of a player. So that's the landscape at running back. James Cook, a lock. I'd be surprised if Davis, Johnson, or Gilliam didn't make it. I'm not sure, barring injury, that Evans or Gore really have a chance. At wide receiver, this one's interesting. I think the Bills' number here is 5. But as I've said before, one of the complicating factors at wide receiver is that the 5 that you perceive don't really help you on special teams. And ideally, you want your 4th and 5th receiver to help you on special teams. Now you're talking about 5 of them that don't help. It's a worthwhile talking point. I know some people might want to gloss over that, but it's interesting. And when this room doesn't look exactly how you think it's going to, remember, there's a special teams element. So I think your roster locks here are Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and Joshua Palmer. Khalil Shakir just signed an extension. Keon Coleman, year 2 after being the 33rd pick in the draft. Josh Palmer, year 1 of a 3-year contract. Those guys are making the team. I put Curtis Samuel and Elijah Moore in the I would be surprised bucket if they didn't make the team. Elijah Moore, based on the way that the salary goes, it's guaranteed. So it's not impossible that the Bills would move on, but they certainly signed him to a deal that suggests he's going to make this team, plus the skill set, plus the momentum that's there. I think there's plenty of reason to believe that Elijah Moore is going to make this team, but I put him in the I would be surprised bucket. And then you have Curtis Samuel, who I think the team really likes. I think came on late last year, had some huge plays down the stretch. You know, you don't love the contract. He's certainly overpaid for an X-factor role, but it is what it is. I do think there's a possibility that he doesn't make it, but I'd be surprised. I'd definitely be surprised. So I think the group is going to be Shakir, Coleman, Palmer, Samuel, and Moore. With Samuel and Moore being the I'd be surprised, which puts this host of so many different players, Caden Prather and Tyrell Shavers and Jalen Virgil, LaVisca Chenault, KJ Hamler, et cetera, very much on the outside looking in, needing help, maybe in the form of injury, but also it's worth talking about that some of those guys have more special teams upside. And if the Bills could find a trade partner for Curtis Samuel, which would be the only practical way out of that deal, and you think to yourself, well, there's some redundancy with the skill set. We need more special teams. We like Jalen Virgil. Let's have him make the team and move on from Curtis Samuel. But the challenge with that is you really need a trade partner to move on from Curtis Samuel for that to make any bit of sense. So there you have it. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver. Coming up next, we're talking about the trenches. Tight end, O-line, D-line. A lot to sort out. Be sure to stick with me. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch isn't just another budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. The insights, folks, they are surprising. When I first started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and I save more. And it's super convenient. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan for those long-term goals. And it's easy to collaborate. You can manage money with your partner in a smoother way than ever. Track everything, whether it's the shared accounts, personal accounts, set goals. You can do all the things and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, folks, let's talk about the tight end position. I think Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox are both roster locks. Dalton Kincaid, first-round pick, year 3, a lot of expectations there. Dawson Knox, yeah, he's a little overpaid. You wish it was a little lower. You wish it was more like what Minnesota was paying Josh Oliver as a high-end tight end too. But, I think he's a glue guy for this team. I'm not saying it's okay that he's overpaid, but you're pretty much locked into the deal. And from the way that the coaching staff and Brandon Mean talk about Dawson Knox to the structure of the contract, he looks like a roster lock to me. Jackson Hawes, the Bills draft pick out of Georgia Tech, falls into the I would be surprised bucket if he were to be not on this team. So that leaves Zach Davidson and Kaliki Latu as your outside looking in guys. Could either one of them be tight end 3? Maybe. I'd be surprised, like I said. I don't think the Bills will roster 4 tight ends. So I think this is Jackson Hawes. And we'll give a little bit of consideration to the other 2. But again, I'd be surprised if it wasn't Jackson Hawes, and I'd be probably even more surprised if the Bills rostered 4 tight ends. An offensive line. I think you've got 4 absolute roster locks. Deion Dawkins, duh. Spencer Brown, the other tackle. Starting center, Connor McGovern. Starting right guard, Osiris Torrance. 4 locks. Now, I've got 4 more in the I'd be surprised, including David Edwards, the starting left guard. I'd be very surprised if he didn't make this team. The reason I didn't put him as a lock is because there is a cap benefit to the Bills moving on. And if they really like somebody like Tylen Grable or Alec Anderson or even Cedric Van Pran Granger, the Bills could look to make that transition. I think it's unlikely. Worth talking about enough, though. And that's why I didn't put him in the roster lock bucket, although he's very, very close. So David Edwards in the I would be surprised bucket. Same with Alec Anderson, utility offensive lineman. Tylen Grable, same deal. Cedric Van Pran Granger, same deal. I think a lot of Tylen Grable, who won the job last year as a swing tackle, love what he did in preseason. I think he's got inside-outside flexibility. And then Cedric Van Pran Granger, I think one of the forgotten or overlooked storylines out of minicamp was that Connor McGovern didn't practice, and that opened an opportunity for Cedric Van Pran Granger to be the first-team center and run with Josh Allen, and that's meaningful for a guy like that to get those opportunities. And so, obviously the Bills have a choice to make with Connor McGovern, whether or not to extend him or not. And if they don't, I think Cedric Van Pran Granger, as a highly experienced 50-something game starter out of Georgia, could be in line to be the starting center. So I think he'd be in the I'd be surprised bucket. I think that there is a legit battle between Ryan Vandemark and Chase Lunt for the 9th offensive lineman spot. I think there's some complicating factors on both sides of the equation. For Ryan Vandemark, obviously you love the time that he's had in Buffalo, developing, making strides. Got a chance to start against Kansas City last year. I thought he did a good job. He's been this team's swing tackle. Like, there's some nice resume here for a guy that hasn't played a ton. And I have a level of comfort with him. But he's a guy that will be a restricted free agent after this season, a Quentin Morris situation, if you will, where the restricted free agent tender probably more than you want to pay a depth offensive lineman, especially foiled against Chase Lunt, who you drafted, have under control for a 4-year rookie deal as a 7th rounder, so very small cap hit, but also he's got complicating factors because he's a complete outlier in terms of size when it comes to wingspan and length, arm length, to play tackle. Could he play guard? Maybe. Be a projection. So you can see how there's complicating factors on both sides, but I do think there is a battle between Vandemark and Lunt, and economics are certainly in play when it comes to that decision. But I think the rest of these guys, Richard Garage and Kendrick Green maybe have a puncher's chance, but the rest I think are very much on the outside looking in. So your offensive line locks: Dawkins, McGovern, Torrance, Brown. I would be surprised if they didn't make it: David Edwards, Alec Anderson, Tylen Grable, Cedric Van Pran Granger, and potentially a legit battle for O-line 9. I don't think the Bills will carry 10. I think the Bills are just too good of a roster to go heavy in certain spots, and I just don't think they can do it at offensive line. So I think 9 will be the number, with a legit battle between Vandemark and Lunt for that last spot. We'll move to the defensive side of the football, and one thing that makes things easy but then complicated are the suspensions of Michael Hoyt and Larry Ogunjobi, where for now you can put them to the side, but they come back and you have a legitimate puzzle to figure out, because you're going to have to let somebody go from your active roster for these guys to come back on. And it'll sort itself out. There could be injuries. There'll be varying levels of performance, but there's a lot to sort out when those guys come back, and we'll see how it goes. But at defensive end, I think your roster locks: Greg Rousseau, Joey Bosa, Landon Jackson. Greg Rousseau, year 1 of his contract extension. Joey Bosa, the Bills, they mortgaged some 2026 cap space to get this guy for this year. He's going to make the team. Then Landon Jackson is a 3rd-round pick. He's in. I would be surprised if they didn't make it players here: AJ Epinesa, Javon Solomon. I'd be surprised if either one of those didn't make it. AJ Epinesa, an expiring contract. Javon Solomon, year 2, kind of brings something different to this mix. We'll see what happens once Hoyt comes back. But right now, your only other contenders are Paris Shand and Hayden Harris. I don't think either one of those guys has enough upside to really challenge Solomon or even Epinesa. At defensive tackle, I think your roster locks are Ed Oliver, TJ Sanders, the 2nd-round pick, and Deion Walker, the 4th-round pick. The Bills could do something with Deion Walker with, his back deal or something. That I could see a world where they slow play that, but I can't predict that. I think he's on a pathway that positions him to play. The Bills are going to need him, early in the season when they don't have Larry Ogunjobi. Behind Oliver and Jones as the starters, it's Sanders, Carter, and Walker. I mean, 2 rookies and a 2nd-year player that pretty much didn't play the second half of his rookie season. You're going to want to have some bodies there. So back to the point here: Oliver, Sanders, Walker, your roster locks. Daquan Jones, Dwayne Carter fall in the I would be surprised bucket. I would be surprised if either of them didn't make it, but I didn't feel like they were locks to the level that I had to put them in the same category as Oliver and Sanders. Daquan Jones, I think the Bills will let him play out his deal. They don't have another option at nose tackle that's anything like Daquan Jones. So I think he's an important player. And Dwayne Carter is pretty close to a lock. I just didn't feel like he warranted the same consideration that I gave an Ed Oliver or a TJ Sanders. I think he'll be part of this mix for sure, but just didn't feel the convictions to really go in and say roster lock after he didn't prove much as a rookie. But we'll see. Top 100 pick that I think the team has some excitement for. So not much to sort out at defensive end and defensive tackle until those guys come back, and then we'll see what happens. Again, it'll take on a life of its own, and maybe it'll be obvious what they need to do, but it could be complicating, right? I mean, remember last year when Darrington Evans was ready to come off of injured reserve, and you're like, what are you going to do? There's no real spot. The Bills let him go. Now, based on the contracts of Hoyt and Ogunjobi, that doesn't seem practical, but certainly something that we cannot completely overlook at this point. All right, coming up next, folks, we got the back seven on defense and specialists. So be sure to stick with me. Welcome back, folks. Let's continue and finish this conversation on roster locks and really identify where the roster spots that are available are. And after I get through the analysis, I'll go through and give you kind of a list of which spots I think are truly up for grabs. We can kind of summarize it. At linebacker, as we've talked about, the top six from last year are all back. They're all back. They recently added Shaq Thompson, which makes things a little more interesting, and I think it was necessary. There's no way that you could just go into this thing saying, here's your top six from last year. They're all back. 3 of them you don't really know much about. We'll add some UDFA that was kind of a safety linebacker hybrid at Virginia Tech and go to war. You needed to have some more competition here, and so I think Shaq Thompson made a lot of sense. I don't know what to expect from him, but as a veteran with experience in the system, kind of knows your coaching staff to some extent with Sean McDermott and Babich and Al Holcomb, who is the Bills linebackers coach that was with Shaq in Carolina for some time. Makes a lot of sense to bring him in and make sure that guys like Edefwan Ulofoshio and Balin Spector and Joe Andreessen, they make the team, that they've earned it. My locks at linebacker, Terrell Bernard, Matt Milano, Dorian Williams. I put Matt Milano as a lock. If you look at the way that they redid this deal, he's not going anywhere. The Bills would lose cap space if they moved on from Matt Milano now. So that contract tells me he's a lock. Terrell Bernard, that's a lock. And I think Dorian Williams has shown enough and is on a good enough of a path for me to say, you know what? He's different than some of these other young players that we're still trying to figure out. Put him as a lock. I put Joe Andreessen in the I would be surprised bucket. When you think about this group of Spector, Andreessen, and Ulofoshio, Ulofoshio is a guy that I liked at Washington. We didn't learn much about him last year. Balin Spector just cannot stay healthy. I think the team likes him, but I don't think he can stay healthy. So Andreessen feels different to me. That's why I put him in the I would be surprised bucket. And then I think you have Balin Spector, Edefwan Ulofoshio, and Shaq Thompson competing for one spot. And they have varying levels of appeal. Edefwan Ulofoshio, 3 more years on a rookie deal. Balin Spector has size and athleticism and experience in your system. And then Shaq Thompson is your most accomplished player. I mean, really, outside of Matt Milano at linebacker. 2 years in a row of monumental season-ending injuries combined with being 31 years old. That's not great. But I legitimately believe that Spector, Ulofoshio, and Thompson are competing for the linebacker 6 job. Now, what's interesting and something I would probably advocate for is, why do you need 6 linebackers? I'd be happy rostering 5. You only play 2. Do you need to have 4 reserves for pretty much 2 spots that you play? Especially if you have Michael Hoyt, who gives you some possibility of playing off the ball. That would be a spot that I'd look at to kind of get a spot back. I don't think the Bills will. I think they like to roster 6, and of course there's a special teams component to that. But if there was a position I'd be looking to go leaner at than typical years, it'd be linebacker for me, and I go with 5. And of course there'd be a battle to play it out, but I'd be looking at that 5 being like Bernard, Milano, Williams, Andreessen, and then if Shaq Thompson showed me enough, he'd be on the team. We'd cut Balin Spector, and we'd hope to get Edefwan Ulofoshio back on the practice squad. I'd be fine with that, but I don't know if the Bills will. At corner, this is probably where it gets the most tricky. I think your locks at corner are Taron Johnson, Christian Benford, and Maxwell Harrison. Those are your locks. Jamarcus Ingram falls into the I would be surprised bucket. One thing I've tried to really talk about a lot lately, including even on this podcast, is that your depth players have to have special teams upside. And Jamarcus Ingram, I think, has become the best special teamer that this team has. So for that reason, as a guy that can play multiple spots in your secondary, is cost controlled, and is your best special teamer, I put him in the I would be surprised if he were released bucket. So Johnson, Benford, Harrison, locks. Ingram, I would be surprised. And then I think you have this group of Trey White, Dorian Strong, Dane Jackson competing for 1 or 2 spots. I think probably 2, maybe 1. But Trey White, Dorian Strong, Dane Jackson competing there. Now, the X factor to me at corner is Brandon Codrington. I don't think he can play corner, but obviously he had a great season as a returner. But can you just be a returner? Like just a punt returner? The Bills, I think, even kind of faded away from him down the stretch. A kick returner. That's where I struggle with Codrington. And I think the math is already challenging. Again, injuries might make this a little bit easier. But I just don't know if there's an overall enough value out of Brandon Codrington to roster him, especially because he doesn't even like cover kicks and punts. He's just a returner. Something to sort out there. And I don't think he can play corner at all. So he's an X factor, and I have a hard time sorting that out. Like, are you gonna roster him over Dorian Strong? I think those are the types of decisions the Bills are facing. So at corner, Johnson, Benford, Hairston, Locks, Ingram, I would be surprised. I think you got several players competing for 1 or 2 spots. At safety, I have Cole Bishop and Taylor Rapp as roster locks. I have Jordan Hancock, the rookie, as a I would be surprised player. And then I think you have Cam Lewis, Derek Forrest, and Damar Hamlin competing for 2 spots. And you could sort that out a number of different ways. Bishop, second-round pick, entering year 2. Taylor Rapp, the team loves him. Hancock, high enough pick with enough messaging there that gets me curious about the long-term plan. And I think you'll sort out Lewis, Forrest, Hamlin for 2 spots. Then at specialists, Reed Ferguson's a lock. Tyler Bass is a lock. There's no competition for those players. Then you have a battle between Jake Camarda and Brad Robbins for the punter. We'll see. We'll see how that plays itself out. I feel like Jake Camarda has more appeal to me because there's been good punting in the league out of Jake Camarda. He had 2 years of being a decent punter, and then the wheels fell off last year. Brad Robbins, I think, was comfortably the worst punter in the NFL in 2023. It doesn't define his career. We've seen plenty of punters get drafted, didn't work with the first team that they land with, and then they become like a 15-year guy. Could be the case with Brad Robbins, but only thing I've ever seen was a full sampling of him being the worst punter in the league in 2023. So we'll see how it plays out. So there's kind of the picture here. I think the roster spots that are truly up for grabs. QB2, wide receiver 5 maybe, tight end 3 maybe, offensive lineman 9, linebacker 6, cornerback 6, and then safety 4/5 in addition to punter. I think those are your legit battles. Now, there's always a possibility that someone that is surprising, you don't expect, has a camp in preseason that kind of forces the issue and things get interesting, or, you know, the Bills might go different with their numbers at a certain spot and that changes things. But it's kind of the big picture thoughts that I have on how this stacks up right now. And I think it's a pretty good spot right here overall, where it's competitive. There's some good quality throughout. I think there's good, healthy competitions between vets and young players. I think this roster is about as healthy as I've seen it in a while in terms of overall, top to bottom, like 1 through 91 right now, and how it shapes up. Things change fast, but it's in pretty good shape. I hope this conversation was interesting for you and helps shape your perspective for what this is going to look like entering training camp. All right, folks, I'm excited for the rest of the week. We got a good herd mentality show lined up, and then probably a quarterback conversation as well this week, kind of getting into those burning questions on my mind about the quarterback position entering the season. So great rest of the week planned here for Locked On Bills. Don't miss anything. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.